Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your pushback channel, Tacitus today, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about how there's strangely near unanimous votes through Western parliaments on any piece of legislation that is important to and is being written up to support the globalist position. So now, when we look at sort of votes going through Parliament on legislation that's not where the globalists don't have a direct interest, then typically the votes are along party lines. So if the governing party has, for example, 55% of the electoral districts, then 55% of the members will vote for a piece of legislation, and there'll be a similar sort of relationship between a number of members or senators or whatever it might be in the House of Review. And if the government's got 60, they'll tend to get somewhere around 60 votes in the. But this is different when it's legislation that the globalists organised. For example, hate speech legislation. Let's take that. Now, the globalists are obviously wanting to ramp up the globalisation project to the next level, and they're noticing that there's increasing resistance to the globalisation project, things, resistance to mass migration and so on. So they're wanting to silence any questions, any dissent, any disagreement, any inconvenient observations. They're wanting to silence that. So they go to the parliaments they control and they demand, hey, you guys, we want to take the globalisation project next level. You have to shut your population up and make it illegal for them to question globalisation or to observe it in any way that may be unflattering to the acceptance of the globalisation project. So now I noticed there's a parliament. Ostensibly a democratic parliament, or was once, and they took a vote on hate speech law. Now, I know that this particular government only has 47% of they're a minority government, only has 47% of the electoral districts, so they could only get, they're in coalition with another smaller party to give them an overall majority on the floor of the assembly, but say at best they would get somewhere between 52 and 55% of the vote. Now I say this because the legislation it's a very controversial topic, censorship, and now the propaganda around the censorship is that no, we're not censoring speech, freedom of speech. We value freedom of speech. It's a democracy. Only Nazis would, and so we value this. This is just legislation to protect little girls dressed in pink that are being oppressed online by fucking Nazis. And it's just to do that. And are you against that? Are you against protecting little girls dressed in pink from Nazis? Are you against that? You fucking fascist. So that's the propaganda. Now, I had a look at the legislation that's now passed. By the way, both the lower, the People's Assembly and the House of Review. It's now, as I understand it, at least it's now law. And I had a look at the legislation looks like it was drafted by a fucking low quality first year law student from a fourth tier university. You could, the piss poor drafting. Now it's purposefully vague so that they can really throw out a dragnet and grab in anybody they want for anything. And they get the sole right, the state that is, gets the sole right to interpret in any way they want, any sort of utterance that the public may make, but it's very clearly designed to anyone that complains about globalisation can be shut up, and if they won't be shut up, be put in prison or bankrupted or both. Now, so it's purposefully vague. The penalties are they talk about oppression of little girls and misogyny. They go around all this sort of stuff, but the reality is that what constitutes misogyny or harassment or anything is insanely vague, and but the penalties are quite severe. So they pretend that it's a civil matter, but then have very severe criminal penalties for what is really a civil misdemeanor, and they marry these two together. And so the vague wording, the poor wording, the contradictory wording, in my view at least, and this increasing globalist device of, again, getting a civil misdemeanor level crime, but attaching to it severe criminal penalties, be they financial or involving detention. This is increasingly the go-to sort of weaponry of the globalist controlled Western government machines. Now, the thing about this was that not only was it piss poor legislation on a very controversial topic, but there was next to no debate on it. I was surprised. You think there'd be frantic debate as both sides put their case, or all sides put their case, that individual politicians would have expressed their concern. There's a lot to be concerned about, in terms of the wording, the sloppiness of it, the vagueness of it, the catch-all intention of it, and so on. There's a lot there to be very concerned about. It's a direct attack on liberty. It is a censorship bill. There's no question of that. That's beyond debate. But no one's saying that. No one's prepared to say it. Everyone's being, everyone's being very quiet about. The media isn't touching it. The alternative media or the online media, there's some commentary there, but the government of this particular area is aggressively trying to shut that down as well. So, in effect, it's presented as a very benign piece of legislation to protect little girls. That's all it's for. Now, the reality, of course, is vastly different, but the amount of people that voted for it, there was nearly 90% of the lower house members, the People's Assembly, voted for it. There was no debate about amendments. There was almost no mention of it. In fact, I found it hard to find anyone proposing amendments, other than proposals from the radicals saying, well, everyone who talks against globalization is literally Hitler and should be arrested without trial, or something. Other than radical proposals along those lines, there was no proposals from the other side saying, hey, this is incredibly vague legislation, or wording. We really need to work with it. No, we can't have people just being arbitrarily detained. All the legal safeguards has taken over 1,000 years, in fact, over 2,000 years plus of jurisprudence, Western jurisprudence, going back to Athenian courts in ancient Greece, Roman courts, and development of canon law, and going through to the common law that we saw until recently. The burden of proof is being effectively reversed in this legislation. You have to prove it wasn't hate and that sort of stuff. These are things where any politician that thinks they're representing their nation, they're representing good government, they're representing their constituents, they should be screaming from the rooftops about this, but there was none of it. Now, so 90% odd, or almost 90% of the lower house or the People's Assembly voted for this insane legislation. And then in the House of Review, where you think a lot of these things would get picked up and where they would get amended, or where the government has no majority at all, the other parties could combine and easily vote it down. But there was 77% of the members voted for it. In fact, the number of people that were abstaining were almost equal to the number who voted against it. So we've got somewhere between, give or take, we've got about 10% of the total amount of federal politicians. This is in this region, 10% who were prepared to vote against this. 1 in 10. How is it possible to get this level of unanimity on a vote? You don't get that level of unanimity on any vote, on anything. Oh, well, very, very rarely, incredibly rarely, in fact. But on any piece of legislation important to the globalists, they are able to achieve this level of unanimity. It's incredible. And it goes to illustrate quite clearly the control they have over the Western legislatures. Now, the globalists are pursuing an ideological agenda, and they're prepared to accept any amount of collateral damage in pursuit of that ideological agenda. So if they're trashing 2,000 years of hard-won, hard-developed jurisprudence, the practice of law, then screw it. Okay, it's a casualty, right? Okay, we accept that. But it's in service of pursuing the ideology. So it's acceptable. It's acceptable that we have that. What's a few million deaths? What's a few thousand years of jurisprudence being trashed? What's the corruption of the political systems? I mean, who cares? We're pursuing an ideology. The ideology is a perfect world of equal outcomes. Who gives a fuck about the collateral damage? And that's generally the attitude. And the censorship bill is something to aid and abet and prevent obstruction to the globalist project and their cherished ideology. But the level of again, you don't get that level of unanimity. Anything. I mean, do the globalists really control 90% of the politicians, or between 75 and 90% of the politicians? I mean, do they really control that much across party lines? This is all political parties included. I mean, wow, that's an incredible level of control. Now, I'll give you an idea. Just a piece of legislation that the globalists had no particular interest in. And or any legislation you look at where the globalists really don't care one way or another, and doesn't, as they see it, affect what they're about. And the legislation, the voting typically goes along party lines. If the government's got 51 out of 100 seats, then it's 51 votes. The legislation passes on that type of thing. Maybe you get a few minor parties, jumping across the lines at the edges, but that's it. So it's an interesting illustration to just look at any piece of legislation where the globalists are involved. That gets an incredibly high level of voting across party lines, which is astonishing. Again, given how piss poor the legislation, in this case, hate speech, how piss poor the legislation is, the wording, the sloppy wording, the fucked up phrasing and how it's carved. I mean, it's the work of a 2-bit fucking amateur, and yet somehow it passes through these parliaments without amendment. So clearly someone's telling these politicians, look, it may be a piss poor piece of it, maybe it's badly written, maybe it's crap, but don't say, you fucking vote for it. No, don't propose an amendment, don't debate it, don't do shit. You fucking vote for it and shut the fuck up, because that's what we, the globalists who are in charge, are telling you to do. Now, there's a second sort of area, or yet another area rather, of concern with these vague, very politicized, very ideological type legislation that's passed. Once the core legislation is passed, then they can make amendments to it, but they can do those amendments administratively. That is, it doesn't require a new law to be passed or a new law to be debated or anything, or any sort of review. An internal working committee, administrative working committee can just simply make the proposals, and it's just written in administratively into the core legislation. So they can make multiple amendments. And I'll give you an example of how this works. I mean, many years ago, there was legislation came around child support. Now, the child support legislation was, what about when a man abandons his wife and family, the loving wife, sweet, pure and loving, with innocent children, all of them girls, all of them dressed in pink. The evil man just abandons them, runs away. He should be forced to make payments to the family for their maintenance, to maintain the children. Little girls and little babies starving because of an evil fascist Nazi who ran out on them. So that was how it was couched. Now, not many people are going to disagree with that. With some guy abandons his family. What a low act! Gee whiz, that he should be made responsible. That low. He should be made responsible. He should be made to pay. Now, just on the face of that, no one disagrees. But how do you legislate something like that? How do you protect people who from being unfairly victimized in courts and things like that? So, not much thought is given to that. And the core legislation is sort of pretty vague. It's pretty broad. It's kind of, we want to be able to catch anyone who we want to catch, and we don't have to be too fussed about the details. So, but what do you do when she decides to abandon him and, I don't know, run off with another guy, or just, getting a bit tired and wants to get rid of him? What do you do when she leaves the relationship? Remember, the legislation was to stop him from leaving and taking his income with him and not looking after. That's how it was originally designed. But what happens when she wants to leave and take? Well, that's okay. We'll just put in an amendment. So even if she leaves, she still gets the money. So, hey, hold on a minute. Hold on. You're saying she can just walk out in the relationship, but he's still obligated to pay her even though she's walked out? Well, the only reason she walked out is because he's a fucking Nazi. So they still come back to this ideological perception of how these things should be framed. And then the amendments to the legislation are just quietly put in administratively, and nobody knows. So a few years down the track, the original, core legislation, be it vague, be it wishy-washy, badly put together, is being further clarified with all sorts of amendments, but none of these amendments are debated or looked at. So this is where we're going with hate speech legislation. They can make many amendments going forward. Anyone who is believed to be associated with, or was associated with, or could be associated with a white supremacist organisation, as designated by the Attorney General, can be imprisoned for up to 5 million years without trial. I mean, how that sort of thing can be put in without any debate or discussion. Now, after the fact, well, that's outrageous, that sort of thing. But then unwinding it is much harder than quietly, surreptitiously putting it in. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.